Hello, everyone. It is time once again for Evidence for Faith, the official voice of Ratio Christi, the Student Apologetics Alliance. This is the show where we help you to learn how to live a happy life, the ideas, the philosophy that leads to a fulfilled and abundant life. I'm Keith Kendricks.
And I'm Kirk Hastings.
And we are continuing our topic today on evolution. Please check out our website, evidenceforfaith.com. That's evidence, the number 4, faith.com. And check out our podcasts on iTunes or Double Twist. We also have a Facebook page that you can jump on and see the current things that are happening. For instance, the conference that you and I went to.
Yes, very interesting conference.
I think you posted something on Facebook already, right?
Yeah, I posted a link to the official webpage of it.
Cool.
It just kind of gives the basics of, you know, who spoke and whatever, but it's I promised I would add more information as I get time.
There you go. Well, this is a regular event. It's put on by the Discovery Institute out of Seattle, Washington, and it's an annual event near Philadelphia. I think it started out being at Westminster Theological Seminary, but they just got so big, it's very popular. I don't know. How many people you think were there?
My wife and I were trying to figure that out. She said that according to when we signed up a few weeks ago, we were something like number 441 and 442 to sign up, and she thought that there was a maximum of like 600 people that could sign up.
Okay. All right. Great.
So
yeah, if I had guessed just on that room that size, I would have said 500 to 600.
Yeah, and I don't think that counts like walk-ins and, you know, a few other people. So I'd say probably between 600 and 650 people were there.
Yeah, and it's unlike a lot of the other kind of apologetics conferences that I go to because they tend to be people talking about what the experts are saying, what the experts are doing. And so they are digesting things for you and trying to bring it to you. But this is actually the experts themselves.
Yeah, they had a lot of great speakers there.
Yeah, so it's a really nice. Now, you were there, you went Friday. They've kind of added more material, made Friday a little longer. I didn't go this year to the Friday.
Oh, yeah, we were there when it started at about 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon. And we saw Vern, if I can say his name right, Poythress? Poythress, I think. Yes. He did a talk on why the beginning of the universe is important and why people fight about it, which was really interesting. And then in the evening session, John Lennox, who is from Oxford, he was wonderful. He has one of those great Irish accents. And he gave a really interesting talk on the origin of the universe, and he sprinkles his lecture with a lot of jokes and humor, and he was really interesting to listen to.
Yeah, he's great. He's very smart. I think he's a mathematician, and he's somebody that has debated Richard Dawkins in Oxford since they're both Oxford professors.
Yes, he's, according to the booklet, he's a professor of mathematics and the philosophy of science at the University of Oxford.
Cool. Okay, so he does get involved. Well, he obviously gets involved in philosophy, but I didn't know if he did that professionally also.
Yep. And, of course, Stephen Meyer was there, who's the director of the Discovery Institute.
Yep. Yeah, he's been a guest on the show before. We interviewed him when his book came out, The Signature in the Cell, and so he was talking a little bit about that and his new book that he's going to be coming out with soon. So I guess we'll have to have him back on again when he does that.
Yes, I believe it's in June. It's going to be released. It's called Darwin's Doubt, about the Cambrian explosion.
Right.
That even Darwin himself had problems with.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why that's called Darwin's Doubt. So, yeah, that's going to be good.
And I had a really neat surprise there, too, that I didn't realize.
What?
I bought a book, I think I've mentioned it on the program a couple of times, a couple of months ago, called The Magician's Twin.
Oh, yeah, you have talked about that. That's right.
By John G. West. It's about C.S. Lewis and his takes on science and society. And the author of that book was there at the conference, and I got him to sign my copy of my book.
Ah, cool.
Yeah, I got to talk to him for a couple of minutes, too.
Yeah, that's the fun part about going to conferences. So I usually try to take books with me and get authors to sign them.
I'm kind of sorry that I didn't buy a couple of John Lennox's books and get him to sign them. But he had so many, I couldn't decide which one to buy.
Right. Yeah, that I agree. And I wish that I could buy more books, but so I have stacks and stacks of books that I am intending to read. So
yeah, I have a pile on my desk too that I haven't gotten to. So I figured I shouldn't be buying more books when I still have a bunch to read yet.
Absolutely. So when I got there Saturday morning, John Lennox was talking on the origin of life, and that was really good. I think the whole gist of the conference was that the cracks in the monolith of evolution are starting to show up.
Yes.
So there are major defections, and there are major persons who haven't defected but are admitting that they've got problems, that, it just doesn't make sense anymore, and that they're going to have to come up with a new explanation. So, of course, they're looking for a naturalistic explanation. They don't want to adopt intelligent design, but they're at least admitting that their ability to explain how things work just doesn't work.
That's what really surprised me. A couple of the speakers mentioned that idea that there were a number of top evolutionists today that are really starting to question Darwinism, and they're realizing that they're coming to a dead end with this, and they realize they need to go in another direction with it, but they haven't quite figured out what that other direction is yet.
Yeah, that's right. So that's basically one of the topics in a book I've been reading on evolution in the 21st century. It's just talking about all of the amazing things that happen that don't really seem to have anything to do with evolution in the Darwinian sense.
Right.
So we had Doug Axe was there also. We should mention him because he is a researcher doing work in biology, and he has published extensively in the secular literature before they found out that he was not pro-evolution, and then they banned him. And it was interesting. There were a couple interesting things that he said. One, during the talk, he spoke about, somebody asked him a question, I guess this was after the talk, somebody asked him a question about the peer review process. And he said, well, an article like his, which proved that evolution was false, never makes it to the peers.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get peer reviewed because the editor never allows the peers to see it.
He told a really interesting story about how he started submitting a series of articles on biology to one of the large journals, and the first 2 or 3 articles were gratefully accepted and peer reviewed and got great reviews and were published, and he was getting along great. And then he started, one of his articles kind of alluded to intelligent design, and the author of the journal became a little how shall I put it, uncomfortable with that.
Right.
But he put it through, and, the peers rated it and thought, the science in this is great. It all makes great sense, and it got published. But then he said the next article that he submitted that really went to town on intelligent design, he said that one wasn't even looked at. He said it was sent back unopened. Never even got to any kind of a review.
Right. And he told an interesting story about how his major article, where he showed, published in the secular literature, how he showed that it was basically impossible to change one protein into another very similar protein with just some slight modifications in the entire time that exists in the universe. That there was a refutation that was written and sent to him for his take on it, and he simply pointed out how wrong the refutation was, and the refutation was never published.
Right.
So his articles in the secular science literature or the evolutionist science literature have never been answered.
Yeah.
So,
and he said that's happened to other writers too that have done the same thing and have torn apart different articles on evolution, but those rebuttals never get published, so you never hear the other side of the story.
Right. Something interesting that I heard also, I ran into him out in the hallway at the end of the conference.
I hope you didn't hurt him.
No, yeah, I didn't knock him down or anything. And he was saying that when studies are done, say an experiment about evolution, and it comes out with a negative result, those studies are never published. So there's this one-way valve. Any study that seems to show that evolution has occurred, those will get published, but any study, even if it's done by evolutionists, it doesn't matter how reputable they are, if the study doesn't show that evolution actually took place, then it's not published.
So much for lack of bias in modern scientific circles, huh?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
So all in all, it was very good. Let's see, there was one more, I guess there was a breakout session that was kind of interesting. Let me just look at my notes. The Doug Axe thing was great because he talked about the probabilities of mutations occurring and that kind of stuff. That was very interesting. I saw the Stephen Meyer talk. Then he did another talk about the Cambrian explosion. Oh, yeah, this was the one about Paul Nelson.
Yeah.
He is a philosopher of science and who specializes in evolution, and he did a talk on what's wrong with Darwinism.
Yeah, I heard that one. That was very good.
Yeah, so it was about the body plans. Now, we've talked about this in the past on the show. I think because Stephen Meyer actually talks about it also in his book Signature in the Cell. But the interesting thing is that the DNA does not contain the blueprints for the body plan. It only tells how to build the parts that make up the body. So, for instance, if you're building a house and you've got DNA telling you how to build things, the DNA is going to tell you how to build a window, how to make a door, how to lay down a wood floor, how to put a roof on. It tells you those things, but it doesn't give you the blueprint.
It doesn't tell you how to build the house.
Right. It doesn't. It doesn't tell you, is this a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, or is this a 1-bedroom, 2-story home, or is this a 30-foot tall skyscraper? That information is not in the DNA.
Huh.
It's actually stored, as best they can tell, it's stored in the cell itself. So the egg carries the information about what type of an animal you're going to make.
Right.
And one of the things that they've done is with these, there are genes called Hawk genes that control the development of organisms, and they've found that they can transplant them. So you can take the developmental gene out of, say, a turtle and put it into a bull, and it will just go with what's there. It'll say, oh, okay, now I'm making a bull.
So it'll make a bull with a shell?
Yeah. No. So it just, even though it's a developmental gene for a completely different organism, so basically there isn't any information in the DNA, even those developmental genes. It all depends on what organism they're in, what cell they're in. That's how the gene interprets what it needs to do.
Right.
So it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. One of the I have a neat quote here from John Lennox.
Okay.
He closed his first talk out with this. I thought was really neat. He said that he spoke about Stephen Hawking a number of times, and he said that Hawking once said that religion is a fairy story made up by people who are afraid of the dark. And then Mr. Lennox went on and he said, here's how I see this. He says, as far as I see it, materialism is a fairy story made up by people who are afraid of the light.
Yeah, exactly right.
That was a great way to close this talk.
Absolutely.
He got a thunderous ovation for that too.
Yeah, it's funny because he's a good speaker, and it's not so much his oratory power. It's more just you can tell the brilliance of the ideas that he's sharing with you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you're just like hearing so much intelligence that you just want to, wow, you just want to stand up. That was really good. You know what I mean? I mean, I've been to really good speeches that didn't teach me much.
Right.
But they were just really powerful, either, encouraging or just really well delivered, and you want to, you want to applaud for that. But this was a different kind of applause. I think the audience was just encouraged by how wise he was.
He really reminded me of a modern day C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And he
so.
said a couple of times that he was a great fan of C.S. Lewis, and I could really see Lewis's influence on him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're just joining us, you're listening to Evidence for Faith, a ministry of Ratio Christi. And we're talking about evolution. I guess we'll let people know so they can recognize our voices. I'm Keith Kendricks.
And I think I'm Kirk Hastings.
Today you are. So,
that's what my cells tell me I am anyway.
So now you can tell our voices apart. So let's get back to, we've been doing a little series on evolution. We had not talked about evolution for quite a while, so we've been doing a fairly regular dose of it for a while now, and I think then we're going to go on to bigger and better things. So we'll try to wrap up today. This is some more information from the talk I did at Kennett Square High School in Philadelphia, or rather Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm looking at our notes here for this talk about where we left off last week, which I believe was about chimp-human similarities.
Yeah.
And I see that right before that we were talking about Darwin's tree of life.
Right.
That was another interesting thing that I believe it was Stephen Meyer said at the conference. He said that even evolutionary scientists are realizing that Darwin's tree of life actually is false, that to get an accurate picture of how living things have, I don't want to say evolved, but how they've survived through the centuries, you'd have to turn the tree upside down and have all of the basic body plans appearing down at the bottom and thinning out at the top rather than the other way around.
Right, because, yeah, that's right. He was talking about the Cambrian explosion.
Right.
So the tree motif just doesn't really make any sense.
No, and he said that they're not really teaching the tree of life anymore because they realize it's totally inaccurate.
Right. And last week we talked about how experiments that have been done to try to delineate some of the branches, and so, because the branches have leaves and then they go into invisibility. The nodes, there's nothing there. We don't have any fossil record for any of those nodes. We just don't know what's there. And so they've used studies, protein studies and DNA studies to try to find the connections a little better, and they all contradict each other.
Yeah.
So you get completely different trees. So for things like the sonar capabilities of whales and bats, those don't appear, they're not near each other in the tree at all, and between them are many ancestral kinds that had no sonar whatsoever. So apparently these capabilities developed completely separately, yet it turns out that in the DNA form they're almost exactly the same, as if a engineer just used almost identical code for both.
Yeah.
So that's what's really so according to the tree structure, then they should be next to each other. They should be related to each other.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about that was he showed the tree of life as they have taught it in the past, and the interesting thing about it was at the bottom of the tree where all the major branches split off from the root, he said at all the the dividing points where there would be some kind of transitional form that would change from one type of animal to another, he said there are all question marks there because they don't know what those are.
Right. Yeah, we don't have any fossil record for them.
Yep.
So, all right. So let's jump into this evidence base for evolution based on the similarity of chimps and humans. So what we've been doing is talking about some of the failed evidences for evolution, and this is another one of those. A lot of people have heard the claim by evolutionists that the chimp DNA is 98% similar to human DNA. And you sometimes hear different quotations, 95%. I've heard it all the way up to 99%. There hasn't been a study that showed 99%, but you still hear it.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I think when we were talking about this last week, I made some kind of a statement about I'll believe that we're 98% similar to chimps when I see a chimp dressed in a business suit walking into a Starbucks with his laptop.
Exactly. So, well, then I'm not sure then if we mentioned about the comparisons being done with parts of DNA that they already knew were very similar.
I think we touched on that. We didn't go into real detail about it.
Yeah. Oh, I know we did. We did get up to the part about the actual size difference. For instance, chimp genome is about 10 to 12% larger than humans. So already it's like, okay, so how is that 95% similar? You've got one has 10 to 12% more than the other. So, but it turns out that there's actually really large blocks of dissimilarity that exist in a number of key chromosomes. So, you can cherry pick what you want to find similarities if that's what you're looking at, but there are actually marked structural differences, including things like the entire male Y chromosome is completely different. So, the best estimates that I've seen is that it's about a 70% correlation, which is not high.
Yeah, and didn't you say something in a previous program about we have something like 40% similar DNA to bananas or something?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, yeah, I'm not sure what that means. See, in a way, it's a kind of a win-win argument for the evolutionists. I mean, even if we were only 10%, let's say we were 10% related to chimpanzees, wouldn't that still mean we were related to them?
Uh-huh.
Right? I mean, no matter how different we are, even if we were 1% similar, you could argue that we're still related to chimpanzees. So they have this win-win situation for them that no matter what the data shows, evolution must be true.
You would just have to take the missing link between chimps and humans and push it further back.
Exactly right. Yep. All right, so let's move on to homology then. What is homology? This is another supposed evidence for evolution, but in reality it could be equally used as an evidence for design because homology is basically similarities.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that there are similarities between different organisms is supposed to be evidence that they descended from each other, that they are genetically related to each other. So, typically you'll see a diagram in a textbook of the hand of a person and the forelimb of various animals, birds, lizards, a whale, those kinds of things. And they'll show that they have similar design. They have the phalanges, carpal bones, the two bones in the lower limb, like we have, one bone up top, and the ulnus and radius bones down below. So a lot of animals have that similar design. So it's said that that's supposed to be evidence of a common ancestor.
Well, using that same logic, couldn't you say that since all ranch houses look pretty much alike, you could say the same construction company must have built all of them?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it just as easily can mean a common designer. In fact, this is very commonly used as an evidence for intelligent design, that there is a similar design. And before evolution was so popular, it was a very common argument for a similar designer.
That God just decided that some designs were good for a lot of things and just used them for a lot of different things.
That's right. That's exactly right. So one of the interesting things is that a lot of these structures that are the same, so the forearms, they don't share the same genetic pathway. So they might have the same genetic information, but they will be developed in different ways. So they'll develop from different parts of the growing cell, or they'll develop from different ends, down, up, down, instead of down, up. So the development can be completely different, which is very interesting. And then again, sometimes the genetic information is also different. So you've got different genetic information building the same structures. You've got the same genetic information building the same structures, but through a different developmental pathway. And none of this makes any sense in an evolutionary framework. So, even evolutionists are certain that particular animals who don't share common ancestry for most of their development have many features that are the same. So they believe that these features kind of developed on their own. Like the eye supposedly developed something like 18 different times. Different features, the heart developed in different creatures, 30 different times. So, this is just a bit crazy, and just shows you have to have a lot of faith to believe that all this stuff can just pop into existence based on randomness and natural selection.
Right.
And we talked about the whale and bat sonar already, so let's jump into then. So we talked about the different evidences for evolution that have failed. You may still find some of them in textbooks, but really the evidence is just not there. So let's look at some of the evidence based on experimentation, because those were like theoretical or observational arguments, but there's been a lot of evidence that has been developed based on actual experiments. And I think, scientifically, this is a much stronger area. For instance, you can say that, I think all swans are white. And no matter how many observations you make, there's a white swan. Yep, there's a white swan. Okay, so all swans are white. It just takes one black swan to disprove your observation. But when you do experiments, you can repeat it over and over. You can vary things. It's a much more solid way of looking at things instead of just, standing out in the field watching, birds and bees and making notes, So there have been several different experiments done to try to prove evolution over time. And you can ask that question, why don't they just do that? If it's true, like, all this microbial resistance to antibiotics, all this stuff, why don't they just do experiments to prove it? Oh, wait, Kirk, they already have done them. Disprove evolution, though. That's why you don't hear much about them. So look at some of the big ones, and these are ones that actually got published, because most of them, when they're done, when they don't show evolution, they don't get published. No one's going to publish an experiment where you didn't prove evolution happened. So, because their belief is that you obviously did the experiment wrong. So we'll look at the fruit fly experiments and bacterial longevity experiments. So let's look at a concept first called the limits of genetic information. All right, what is that? Well, breeders have long known that you will reach a limit when you're trying to find certain features in an animal, a pigeon, say, or a dog, or other kinds of animals that are being bred, even genetic breeding of plants like corn or strawberries. They know that they reach an end. They get to a point where no further change is going to happen. So say you're working with sheep. This is one of the examples that Stephen Meyer brought out. If you're raising sheep and you want to try to get the woolliest sheep you can get, so you could play a little natural selection game where you artificially select and find and try and get the woolliest sheep. Well, you're only going to get so far. So you'll get to the woolliest sheep, and then it just, no matter how much you try to continue, it just doesn't go any further.
If you want to try to change a sheep into a dog, you're going to hit a wall.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You get, I guess you would get the most dog-like looking sheep that there is, and then that would be the end. That would just stop. You just wouldn't get any further than that. So, and it's true for all kinds of breeding, roses, pigeons, corn. We know we've talked about on the show in the past how all dogs we know genetically developed from the Middle Eastern wolf. And so they had a source, they had an organism that had all the information in it to make all the different dog types and dog breeds. but they all share the same genome, the same genetic information, and eventually you just can't get any further. You get really tiny dogs like Chihuahuas, or you get dogs that have basically growth hormone diseases that are giants like Great Danes, but that's basically it. So there was an experiment done to try to see what could be done with fruit flies. Now, actually, somebody talked about this too at the conference. I think it was Paul Nelson's talk. He talked about this fruit fly experiment.
Yes, I think he did.
Yeah, and they were able to mutate every single base pair, either individually or in combinations, to try to produce something other than fruit fly. And they weren't able to. All they got was fruit flies, crippled fruit flies, or dead fruit flies.
Right. I think he said normal fruit flies, sick fruit flies, or dead fruit flies was all they got.
That's right. So, they got things like limbs being on top of the head instead of in the body. They got extra wings that didn't work, by the way, because they didn't have the extra muscles attached to them to make them move. Things like that. Those were the only things that were able to survive all of this experimentation. And the interesting thing that he brought out is that if you're going to get a different type of animal, you have to change the body plan right at the beginning, because the information is stored in the parent's egg, the prior egg, and so it divides based on what egg it is.
Right.
And if you want to get it to divide into a different kind of animal, you have to get a mutation, a change to occur really rapidly before a lot of the divisions have occurred, where, for instance, a set of cells gets set aside and it's, okay, this is going to be the liver. And another set of cells gets set aside, okay, this is going to be the brain. Before that kind of thing happens is where you need to have a change happen. And even the smallest changes at that stage almost always cause lethality.
Yes, I distinctly remember him talking about that and saying that on the one hand, like you say, in order to change the body plan, which develops really early in the animal's development, you have to have that mutation happen really early. But the problem is the really early mutations cause the entire system to crash.
Right.
And you don't get anything, or it dies or whatever.
Yep. That's exactly right. So they're in this really no-win situation. It just cannot happen the way evolutionists think it happens. And so this fruit fly experiment was the equivalent of millions of years worth of evolution that were simulated, and there just simply was no result.
Yeah.
So this was done by, I guess it was started by, and it's been carried on by others, but it was done by Dr. T.H. Morgan from Columbia University. I think he first published on it in 1911, and these experiments have continued on with nothing happening. Short wings, orange eyes instead of red eyes, things like that. A totally black fly, things like that, but nothing of any consequence. No evidence of any kind of evolution. The fruit flies are still fruit flies, but you do see changes to morphology. So shapes can change a little bit, and the problem is all of them had bad fitness costs. Right? So having those extra wings doesn't actually help the fruit fly to fly. It actually hinders it from flying.
Right.
So the issue is that you don't get any increase in information. And that's the real crucial thing that you need to have. Where does the information come from? And that is the question that's been haunting evolution, and it's the question that has really brought the collapse, or the near collapse, the pending collapse of neo-Darwinian evolution.
Yeah, that's why I think that a couple of different speakers at the conference said that they really feel that neo-Darwinism is on its way out, because even the Darwinists are realizing they're hitting a dead end here, and they have to come up with something else in order to explain this, or else they're going to have to throw it all out the window.
Yep.
and they're just hitting a dead end trying to figure out, a way around this. Like you said, they're still trying to find a naturalistic explanation for all this, but they can't come up with one.
Right. And when all of their experiments are failures, like this fruit fly experiment, here's a couple of quotes. This is from Dr. C. Schwab in 1994 in Biochemistry and Physiology. He says, homeotic changes induced in Drosophila, and that's the fruit fly genes, have led only to monstrosities. And then Dr. Diesel, biology professor in the Encyclopedia of Life Sciences, says, if mutation were a variation of value to the species, then the evolution of Drosophila should have proceeded with extreme rapidity. Yet the facts entirely contradict the validity of this theoretical deduction. And then Lynn Margulis, writing in Acquiring Genomes, A Theory of the Origins of Species, said, never, however, did that one mutation make a wing, a fruit, a woody stem, or a claw appear. Mutations, in summary, tend to induce sickness, death, or deficiencies. No evidence in the vast literature of hereditary changes shows unambiguous evidence that random mutation itself, even with geographical isolation of populations, leads to speciation.
And of course, speciation is one species changing into another.
Exactly.
Now, what I don't understand is if they have all of this negative evidence that seems to indicate that Darwinism doesn't work, why haven't they chucked this theory?
Well, apparently they're in the process. So, you know why they haven't? Because they haven't found something better yet. They don't want to chuck the theory until they get a new theory of evolution by natural means. So basically, until there's something to replace it, they're not going to chuck the old one.
But then what really drives me up the wall is the people on the internet that are basically lay people, and they keep wanting to say, oh, evolution is a fact. That's been proved.
Right. And in a sense it has. It's the microevolution. I mean, everybody agrees with microevolution.
Sure.
So they just don't realize that they're obfuscating. They're missing the point. So let's talk about the bacterial experiments. We've done a lot of it. We'll just briefly cover it because we've talked a lot about it in the past. What happens if you take a supply of bacteria and you give them a bunch of nutrients and study them for 56,000 generations? What happens?
Whew, that's a lot of generations. You get a bunch of old bacteria?
Yeah, well, the old ones die off and you get new ones. 56, I should have worked that out to human beings, how long of a period of time. I guess by, let's say, 20, so what would that be, about 1 million years? That's about 1 million years worth or more than 1 million years worth of human evolution. So in bacteria, you get 10 to 20 fixed mutations, right? So by fixed, it means it's now present in the entire population. And those help it adapt to the new situation, right? Living in a petri dish, in a jar. And there was an example of one cryptic gene being turned on. So there was a gene for a way of digesting food, and it was actually something that was in the medium, the agar, that the experimenters thought that the bacteria wouldn't eat. It would just grow in it. And it actually had a gene already ready to eat that stuff, and after a long time of being at near starvation levels, finally a mutation occurred that turned that gene on. And so then it was able to eat the agar that it was growing in. So basically, no new information. A little bit of fine-tuning of current information and the turning on of a cryptic gene that was already there, but nothing new, no new chemical pathways, and if it had been able to eat the new food source, if that had come about by creating it, that would have been a perfect example of evolution. It would have been new information, a new way of digesting food. But what they found out was that was already there. So another interesting thing about these experiments is that all those mutations, they happen right away. So when the bacteria finds itself in the new environment, it mutates rapidly to try to adapt to the new environment. And then after that, it just trails off because there's nothing more it can do. It doesn't have any other way of adapting to the environment. So you get this trailing off until virtually nothing happens anymore. So what we've learned now is that the DNA is actually pre-programmed to adjust itself depending on the environment. So it'll turn on information. It will make use of changes and call them mutations, but they're not accidents because they're actually being controlled by the DNA itself. So the DNA is allowing mistakes to happen and be passed on to the next generations in order to increase its ability to survive. So just fascinating. So this experiment then really doesn't show that evolution occurs. It shows that things are intelligently designed to survive in different environments.
Yeah, it's interesting the way this resembles backup systems that we put in different machines that are already there, that are designed to kick in when something goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. Yeah, I want a car that is also a boat. One of those boats one of those cars that you drive around and there's the water and you just cross. Maybe it's a convertible, so you open the top. So, and then when it rains, you close the top. That's the kind of creatures that God made.
I always thought it was great in the old Star Trek TV series when something would go wrong with the Enterprise and Captain Kirk would say to Scotty, "Engage the backup system, Scotty," and Scotty would push a button and everything would be fine. It's like, wow, that's a great backup system.
Cool. And that's really true. That is the way that organisms are designed. There are backup systems for backup systems.
And that argues for an intelligent designer that put that backup system in there for that very purpose.
Now, evolutionists have said, well, these are just copies of genes. So the gene has accidentally been copied, so it's in there twice. So it's a backup system in case the first gene gets damaged. But that's not actually the kind of backup systems that we have. We have actually backup systems that are different. So they're different proteins and different genes that are able to do the same function or similar functions, and those back up. So they're off until they're needed, or they're doing something else, but they get co-opted to do the original task if something gets damaged. So it's just amazing how interdependent all the information is in the genome. Well, let's try and finish off with the fossil record. Right? Here's a quote from Charles Darwin. "Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory."
And that hasn't changed since Darwin was around.
Yep, that's right. And I think he thought that it would. He thought that it would change, that they would fill in the gaps, but there has not been any filling in the gaps. And I think this is the reference that is used for Darwin's doubt, because he said, this really is the strongest objection. This may be what proves that his theory was false. Here's a quote from Stephen Jay Gould. "The history of most paleontologists, for those who don't know, the history of most fossil species includes two features particularly inconsistent with gradualism, right, or Darwinistic style evolution. Number one, stasis. Most species exhibit no directional change during their tenure on Earth. They appear to be in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. Morphological change is usually limited and directionless. And number two, sudden appearance. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by the steady transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed."
And this is an evolutionist that said this.
Right, Jay Gould.
Amazing.
Yeah, just showing that the fossil record does not support evolution. The progress of fossils is not smooth, and there are numerous fossil graveyards that have both land and sea creatures mixed together. So in the same strata, in the same layer, there are ocean-dwelling creatures and land-dwelling creatures mixed together. And, what do the evolutionists do with that? Well, they have to have elaborate explanations as to how these things got mixed up. So it was really laid down the right way, the way it should have been according to their theory, but then another flood came along, picked up those fossils, and mixed them all together into a second set. And by the way, left no trace, other than the fact that there's ocean creatures and land creatures together.
So they're saying that minor floods may have happened after the fossils were laid down that mixed them all up, but they won't consider the possibility of a single worldwide flood that may have mixed all these creatures up to begin with.
That's right. And then you look at the Cambrian explosion. That was one of the things that was talked about at length in the conference that we were at. It has revealed life's complexity right from the start. Now, and one of the things that I didn't know was or at least didn't remember that was in the Cambrian level was fish. Did you see that when they talked about that? The vertebrate fish.
Yes.
Were there. So, really a advanced life form just suddenly appearing with no ancestors at all.
Well, I believe it was Stephen Meyer that pointed out that all of the basic body plans, animal body plans, are all there in the Cambrian explosion.
Yeah, that's right. Virtually all body plans, almost every one. So, and this really goes very hard against the evolutionary dogma. They talked about in 1940 the amazing fossils that were discovered in Canada's Burgess Shale, just incredible diversity of types and clarity.
Yep.
And, all kinds of new fossil types that were unknown prior, but none of them were primitive in any sense, right? And they weren't ancestral to any other type. So it wasn't that you could look back at the Cambrian and say, oh, well, here's the ancestors of something that we knew about later.
Right.
Again, they're just not the same. They're completely different. So what is the truth about the fossil record? The truth is that all around the world there's rock layers, strata, from floods that cover entire continents, and some of them multiple continents. There's layers of the Grand Canyon that can be found in Russia. So all of these strata, all these layers have razor-sharp edges. Look at them up close. Look at them in a distance, and you see these razor-sharp edges. There's no sign of any kind of water erosion, no tree roots digging down. There's no animal burrows. You do find some small amounts of things that could take place in a short period of time, like worm burrows, that kind of thing. So if you're, a worm that gets buried by mud, maybe you're not minding so much, you haven't died yet, and so you burrow into the strata below where you were laid. That's about all they find, but there aren't any, animal burrows. Virtually no erosion, no earthquake evidence. This is the fascinating thing, right? Tens and hundreds of millions of years have supposedly passed, and the earthquake damage is throughout the entire layers. All the layers get damaged. So it's just evidence that these strata were actually laid down simultaneously. And, Kirk, we said that experiments are the best way instead of just, looking out and taking notes and saying, oh, well, these things, they look like they've got razor-sharp edges, so they were all laid down at once. What happens if you do experiments? If you do experiments with sediments and you mix up different sediments, different size soils and minerals, and you put them in flowing water, they will automatically layer out into strata and form simultaneously in moving water. So you can repeat this yourself, and you can find it on, if you're interested, you can find it on YouTube. And we also have found observational evidence of the same thing happening in river deltas. So when there's large amounts of sediment pouring out into the ocean in bays, you get this multiple sediments, layers of sediments being laid out simultaneously, not one after another, not the lowest one is the oldest and then the next, and until the youngest is at the top. They were actually laid out continuously, and the ones closest to the river mouth are the oldest, and the youngest are the ones further out in the bay. Those are the youngest. So, and this has been proven to have occurred even out in the deep oceans by deep ocean drilling.
Amazing.
Well, I guess we'll have to call it quits there. There are plenty more podcasts that we've done on evolution. If you're interested, look back at our previous podcasts. I'm Keith Kendricks.
And I'm Kirk Hastings.
We've been listening to Evidence for Faith, a ministry of Ratio Christi. Send your comments or questions to email at evidenceforfaith.com. Join us again next week for more reasons to believe, and always remember that the best reason for being a Christian is because it's true.